Hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
Welcome to the AGI Early Careers Network broadcast for today. Apologies for confusion with the correct broadcast link, but if you're seeing this, you've found the right place. So welcome. We'll give a couple of moments just for other folks to join. So we'll start properly in 2 minutes from now.
Yes, just to give people a bit more time.
Yeah.
Apologies for the technology issues. Yes.
Good. So I think people are coming in.
Yeah.
I don't know whether for the audience, it looks on our screen like the signs behind us are backwards. Hopefully the imaging isn't reversed for you as well, but I fear it might be. So no, I'm being told it's actually the right way around. So it just looks backwards for us. So that's marvelous. So you can, we don't have the roll up for the AGI unfortunately today, thanks to adversity from our couriers. But CARTO and Ordnance Survey are represented at least. So let's probably kick things off there. I think
yes,
anyone who's
Tim,
missed the very start can catch up later.
So I'll just quickly give a bit of introduction. I'm Diana Morar from the AGI Early Career Network Committee. As you may know, we're trying to support any early career network members in their progress and career-wise. And the series of webinars we've been carried for a while now is trying as well to help people, maybe give them a bit of mentorship and advice in their careers. And today we are lucky to have Tim Marston from CARTO as a representative of the geospatial industry. So hopefully you'll get a bit of insight on what happens in CARTO and also in his position as a head of European partnerships at CARTO. And also, if you need any more information about the AGI Early Career Network, where to sign up or any of our social accounts, please have a look in the description of the video. You have all the links to the pages, to the LinkedIn, to the Twitter account. Also, any questions, please do post them on the live chat, or if you prefer Twitter, that would be great as well. And we will try to answer at the end. We will have maybe 10 minutes for questions and answers. But I think
lots of questions would be great. I love questions.
Yes, so questions are great. Cool. Just to be a bit more interactive with you as well. So I'll just hand it over to Tim now, and he can just guide you through all the webinar content. You have the structure in the description as well, so it should follow.
Great.
Over to you.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.
So I'll take center stage. It's the first time I've done a broadcast through YouTube, so forgive me if my controlling of the system is a little erratic, but I will do my best to make it clean and crisp for everybody. So hopefully you can all see my screen and the slides here that I'm going to present. I don't have too many slides to share with you, but there are some that I think it's important to set the tone for the content that we're going to present nice and crisply. And what I will do is I'll walk through this material and then get into some live examples of how CARTO looks and feels and how we do spatial analyses in CARTO. And then, as Diana said, we will have some questions at the end. I just want to check before I go too far that I haven't got my line on mute or anything, just to make sure I'm not. No, good. Okay, I realised that I have in the past started off with a call and gone 5 minutes in without actually anyone being able to hear anything. Okay, so here's where we go. So first of all, some background on who we are as CARTO. You may not have heard of us before this call. Hopefully you have. Increasingly you will. We are a startup around the geospatial market. We're a location intelligence vendor, and I will explain what that means as we go through this material. Our headquarters are in New York. We have actually our largest office is in Madrid, where the company was originally founded and where many of our engineers are based. And then we have a presence in a number of other locations around the world. We're growing very quickly. We're still very small. We're only 130 people in size, but we have a reach, I think, that in our customer base that far exceeds that. And we've picked up some nice accolades like the Gartner Cool Vendor status earlier this year. And the premise upon which our business is built is, is around location data, of course. I mean, that's what we're all involved with here. And what we're trying to do as CARTO is provide a means for businesses to use this huge volume of location data that they have that right now they're possibly not exploiting. In many situations, organizations will be facing a great growth in their data. This is very common, and everybody knows that data volumes are exploding. But typically, the classic tools for analysis for data don't take the spatial dimension fully into account, and they're much more focused on the temporal dimension, the dimension of time, or the dimension of who, the dimension of when, not the dimension of where. And what we're trying to do is make that more accessible, because we see companies that have put the location data natively into their business DNA as disrupting markets that they're entering, and they're using that exploitation of the location data to their advantage against more traditional organizations who are been less able to use that and monetize that data in the same way. So we're trying to lower that bar of entry. We're trying to say there is a common platform that you can use that will allow you as a business to use that location data in a way that is intuitive to your business and allows you to make those decisions. So for traditional businesses as well. Now, that kind of sounds a little bit like GIS, traditional GIS. So I wanted to sort of then explain why what we do is not the same as traditional GIS. There is some overlap for sure. There's also overlap in what we do with what classic BI business information tools like Tableau, for example, do as well. And the space we're in, location intelligence space, sits in between those two fields. So with traditional corporate business intelligence tools, you can often do mapping now in those solutions, but they don't do the spatial analysis. And that's the real value in what a tool like CARTO can bring. Conversely, on the other side, with traditional GIS tools, there are a broad array of functions of traditional GIS around the surveying and ingestion of data that are not the area that we as a location intelligence vendor are trying to approach. What we're trying to do is provide an analysis toolkit for spatial data, for very quick analysis. So it's designed to be a much more flexible and lightweight approach to those spatial problems. And then, of course, we all relate to the location-based services of technologies like Google, Mapbox, and so forth, who feed in and provide underlying sources that we're able to use. And, of course, the Ordnance Survey, who are kindly hosting us today. So, as I mentioned earlier, that we have obviously a good spread of customers as CARTO. We see some functional areas and industry segments where there have been particular clusters of use of this sort of business-oriented location analysis. First is around the sales and service function within businesses. So, around questions, well, as on the slide here, questions of where to place, where to place marketing spend based on the data of, underlying demographics. Where are clusters of potential customers that are not being addressed? Where should service resources be placed to best keep customers happy, for example, and those kinds of questions. And we have customers across a number of different industries, in telco, in utilities, strategy consulting firms who are answering these kinds of questions using CARTO. We're used in financial services by retail banks for operational efficiency around the distribution of their ATM machine networks, as well as innovation decisions around how they can package up and monetize the transaction data that they have, but in a way that allows them to just provide a view of that through an interface to their business customers, rather than just giving them spreadsheets of data. And then we have also on the edge examples of organizations that are doing very advanced kinds of analyses, looking at the exposed insurance assets underneath significant weather events, and looking at which insurers are exposed or at risk from those weather events, and allowing trading decisions on stocks to be made based on those weather events. And then retail is, of course, one of the areas where geospatial technologies have been more heavily used for a number of years. A classic kind of question in this space is around store location placement. Where do we put a retail store to best serve new customers, or how do we rationalize our store network in a way that's going to least impact our overall network performance. And we have, again, some very large customers in this space. You'll see, particularly on this slide, a couple of those reference cases are very well-known Spanish brands, and that's just a sign of the heritage of our company. We've got some of our strongest relationships are with Spanish organizations like El Corte Inglés or Telefonica and organizations like that. And then finally, the public sector. We work with a lot of city and regional governments. Barcelona, New York City, Mexico City are probably some of the larger conurbations who are working with CARTO, and also a number of municipalities and regional district governments around the world as well. And there are two streams of activity where spatial data is important to these sorts of organizations. On the first hand, again, like as I mentioned with the retail banks, there's the question of operational efficiency. So it's the smart city sort of dynamic of, how can we most efficiently empty the waste facilities, the waste bins around our region in a way that allows us to have the smallest size of fleet of garbage lorries that we can, whilst providing the quality of service that our residents expect. And so those kinds of operational questions are very, very spatial, and a tool like CARTO is very powerful for delivering answers. On the flip side, the second stream of activity we often see as well, and where CARTO is most often seen publicly, is with open data for citizens, where data such as parking spaces within a district, or where there are recycling centres for citizens to know where their facilities are to go and use. It's very quick to create maps of that kind of data and share that in CARTO, and I'll show you that in a moment. So what we provide is a platform then for creating solutions that deliver to these problems. And there are two layers to what we do, but both of these layers, it's important to state, are open source. So our business is around providing open source software to organizations. We provide that in a hosted service most often, but we have many customers who will install the software in their own servers, and we provide support to them there. So the two layers that are important to understand are engine and builder. Engine is the layer underneath all of the processes you will see in CARTO. This is where the data is stored, and where, so in a geospatial database, so that the analyses can be run that provide the insights and the inputs. But on top of Engine, we have an application we built. Actually, I'll go back a step. If you see the screenshots here, the screenshots here are all examples of applications built on top of Engine. So it has some common API connectors. You build a light web application that will run on those APIs to deliver your application. And we built an example of that sort of application ourselves called Builder, and this is designed to be a general purpose interface for very fast analysis of spatial data in a way that's intuitive and in a way that you can share and publish very easily out to your audience. And then finally, the final piece of our product portfolio is the mobile SDK. This is for offline mapping and routing in native mobile apps. It's used, the two main clusters of use we have for this are for tourism apps. So for example, Lonely Planet city guides have CARTO mobile apps within them, and emergency services, so rescue services where they don't want to depend on network coverage to be able to map and route to find and perform their operations in disaster zones. So that's a summary of who we are as CARTO, what we do. I think Diana's probably checking for questions on her side, so if you have any, do post them, and I will be happy to answer questions as we go, as well as at the end. But that's, I will come back to a couple more slides when we talk about career development towards the end of this session. But the next step, I think, is to look at the tool itself, explain a little bit more and show live in action, which is always a risky thing to do, actually what you can do with CARTO. So this is my CARTO dashboard for my CARTO Builder account. This is all going through a browser. So everything you see that I'm going to show you is going through our cloud service. All of the analyses are being run remotely in that cloud service, not locally on my machine here that I'm working from. And I have some examples here of maps I've built previously. I also have a bunch of data sets that are in my account. I can connect other data sets in very easily, static files, shared files that we can define an update cycle against, or we can bring things in from Twitter, connect to Salesforce, or on top of ArcGIS server as well, if we are using those kinds of tools also. But in this case, let me see, I've got a data set here that is credit card transactions from Barcelona. I might just need to hide this little menu down here. Here we go. You can see here, this is just a sample of the data here. There is a location, a dimension, latitude and longitude already to this data. So it's very easy for us to throw this straight into a map. If we didn't already have that, that geometry for the elements in the data set, we can geocode them through this interface, and we hook into geocoding providers to do that, because we as CARTO are providing that simple interface, but we're not providing the data service itself. So I've got those points. There's about 150,000 rows in this data set, 150,000 transactions, credit card transactions from Barcelona from about 5 years ago. This data was captured, throwing those all on a map. So there they are, all on a map. So far, so good. You know, this is just a lot of red dots. Now, as I mentioned, the real value of a tool like CARTO is the ability to do the spatial analyses, and we'll come to that in a moment. But before we do, it's worth also looking at some of the style and presentation pieces that you can play around with very quickly in this interface to just change the way that you're presenting the data. And the way you present data, as I'm sure you appreciate, can have a massive impact on how that data is interpreted. So, for example, we can change the color of the spots. What I've done is I've changed them based on a dimension in the data, which was the shop category. I'll just add a little legend there so you can see. It's all in Spanish, of course, because it's Barcelona, but you can see here each different color spot denotes a different category of retailer, in this case, where these transactions were happening. We can also aggregate. So we can aggregate into arbitrary squares. We can do that on a calculation of something within the data, or we can just do it on a count of the number of events under each square. So, and I can make those squares larger or smaller. So here we go, just rerun that analysis under larger squares, and it's on the fly doing a calculation of how many under each of these squares, and then coloring the square according to the volume underneath. And we can do that same aggregation spaces as well. And in fact, actually, I missed a piece. I missed. We can also, where are we? We have a means which I made this mistake yesterday of losing where it was in. There we are. Here we are in the value. We can also, if we wish, color the spots into shapes. We can make shapes of those. Huge data set like this. Well, it's not a huge data set, but a large data set that makes quite a mess. But we can use custom widgets and logos in here. There's some default in, but we can also upload images as well to tag against data sets that we want to map. So we could upload I could upload a picture of my own face and have that 150,000 times spread across Barcelona, but I don't think the world deserves that. So there's some quick options for presenting the data. We can also animate it. There is a time dimension here to the data, and we can color that based again on one of the segments in here. So we have a crazy disco effect with the data. Hopefully that's coming across on the webinar. I'm looking across to someone else's screen to see if it will in a moment, I gather. And we can make it into a heat map as well. But this isn't actually giving us data or an analysis that's really useful typically. It's just a way of presenting the data. And sometimes means of presenting like this. Did the animation come across okay?
Yes.
Good, okay. So the point was made. These are just ways of presenting data. They're not going to help an organization make business decisions. So what kind of things will help make business decision is obviously the analysis. An aggregation into arbitrary shapes like this is of course one means of analysis. It's a very quick sort of on the fly approach. But typically when people want to aggregate a data set of a high volume of events, you will want to aggregate that into shapes and polygon set that is more relevant to the context of the data that you have. So in this case, this being Barcelona, I have a data set of polygons for Barcelona land parcels. So I can bring that into my map here. It adds it as another layer on the side here, and you can have around sort of 10, 12 layers easily down the side here with different sets of data in or combinations of data. And I'll just reorder those layers so you can see the transactions. Will reload this sensor tile, just take a moment. There we go. You can see the transactions on top of the polygons there. So what we want to do then, if we're doing an aggregation here, is to do a calculation above each polygon of something, an attribute of the data from that point layer. So if I go here into the polygon layer and add an analysis, this then takes us to the screen where we can choose the analysis we want to apply to that data set. So here are, if I scroll down slowly, you can see here are the analysis methods available to us through the Builder interface. If we were to create our own application on top of Engine, so directly onto the API keys underneath the Builder level, then we can actually use another, I think 12 different analysis methods are natively available in Engine as well, including things like gravity models and things like that. But here in the Builder interface, we're trying to find a balance between sophistication of capability, but simplicity of interface. So in this case, we want to intersect one layer with the other, perform an operation on the data of one, and write the output of that into the second layer. So I'll select the intersect there. So that's the transaction data is the second layer that we're intersecting. And then we can again choose, the classic mathematical operations here that we want to do the calculation on. So we could do a sum of the amount, or we can do again just do a count of the volume of transactions within each of those polygons. So I'll run that analysis. That analysis has now completed, as it's telling me down there. If I just toggle down here to look at the data from this layer now, and scroll across, this data sample here has obviously a lot of rows and dimensions to this data, but right at the end, 2 columns have now been added to this data set. So you can see here, and we have count vals density. Hopefully this is coming through okay on the YouTube broadcast. So count vals is literally, this is the count of the number of events that have happened in this polygon. And then count vals density here on the, it looks like it's slowed down. No, it's okay, good. Catching up with me. Count vals density on the very end here is showing the number of events divided by the size of the polygon. So that's typically a more useful measure for us to use in analysis because, of course, a very large polygon can distort the literal count of events. So if I go back to the map view, and then if I just go back to my layers even and make the layer with the transactions invisible, we can see then just the polygons left here that have values against them now. Analysis is run because some of these, of course, some land parcels would have had no transactions within them, and so they have a 0 value, and so they don't now feature in this visualization. And we can, let me just style that. We can color those polygons based on one of those elements we just wrote. So here again are those 2 elements that came from that analysis. And so we can color the map now based on that. I'll give it a little pop-up legend again so we have a sense of how dark things are. So the darker the red here, the higher the density of transactions within that polygon. And so we have a very quick analysis output. Now, getting this far is pretty helpful, but often you will want to go further with data sets like this and and very often people are looking for outliers or sometimes looking for clusters in data sets like this. So where are the real centers of activity, or where are the anomalies that we should be investigating further? And so what we can do is we can take the outputs of that first analysis we did, new analysis on the side here. So add a cluster analysis here is one of the other options available to us through the analysis window. We can add that analysis into our flow. I select the target column, doing the cluster analysis again. So we'll do it against the density again. And we can change significance. We can change the number of neighbors that are being calculated against. I'll leave those at their default settings. Run that through, and that analysis is now completed. Again, if I just to illustrate what's happened here in the data set underneath, I'll scroll all the way across again. Columns have been added on the end here for 4 dimensions that are now added. Quads, significance, the Moran, and value numbers. So quads is the one that I will look at for a little bit of interaction here. I'll explain what the acronyms mean in a moment. Let me just add a little interactive widget onto the map. So if I can auto style, so I can color the map based on these quadrants. So if you see here now, Any quadrant that is purple is a low quad. So that means it was a low value in its density on the polygon after the first analysis. It was a low density measure, and it's surrounded by other polygons with a low value as well. So that's a low value cluster. Then we have low highs, which is low value outliers. That's a low value that's surrounded by high values. We have high highs, so that's a high value cluster, and high lows, so that's a high value outlier. And we can say, well, I just want to look at the low value outliers. Look there, they are up there. Whereas the high value outliers, there's one down here, and there's a little one over here. If I zoom in, you can see. And in fact, I've been advised by my colleagues in Spain that underneath this polygon here, about 6 months after this data was captured in 2012, there was a restaurant here that got a Michelin star. So arguably, this data set is showing a leading indicator of the activity around that restaurant as it gained popularity. It's popular because it was good, and because it was good, getting a Michelin star. So just a little sort of backstory to explain some of the data. So we have an analysis there we built very quickly, and we might say, well, go with me here on this one. Might say this is a really valuable piece of analysis. I want to share this with my colleagues, or I want to share this with my customers or other people in my organization, or with the general public, because the public need to know that there was a high density of transactions in that area of Barcelona. So I can go to publish the map I've created. I can share it and keep it private. I can share it still with colleagues in my organizations. These are all people in CARTO who have accounts. Obviously, in CARTO, we all have accounts. But I can also make it completely public, or I can put it behind a long link that's not searchable, or I can put it behind a password. So if let's give it a password of CARTO, because no one's going to figure that out. And then I can publish. I can go to this tab here. We then have a link here that we can go to see the map, and I'll go to that in a second. We also have then the iframe HTML here, so that we can embed that map within another web page we might have already built, where we just want to put the map within it. And that's commonly what we see a lot of newspaper organizations and media organizations doing with CARTO maps. But if I go here to just the direct URL, here you see the map we created. Here's that interactive widget that I added in, and that interactivity is still there available to me as the user. Around then and explore that data in the way that has been provided to me. So you can make those. If I go to another example of something a little more complex, at least in the widgets, US Census data, you can have a lot more dimensions down the side here, and you can give the power to the user at this point, the ability to essentially rerun analyses subject to what you provide them to. So in this case, this is US Census data. Publicly available, and we got here then a number of dimensions from the census, and here the total population. So this is calculating the total population in the counties that you can see within the map. So if I zoom in and cut out the top bit of Alaska there, for example, and some of the east and west, you'll see that this number where we calculate something, because it's just the based on the visible area. Now, as a user, I can color the map now based on one of these dimensions. So I could do it based on median household income, and you'll see here then the counties are recoloring based on that measure there. So the darker the green, the poorer the lower the median household income, and the more orange you get, the higher the median household income. And then we can filter or select within some of these other elements here. So some of these demographics, so we can, where are the most white and the least African American. Unfortunately, with census data, it tends to be very ethnically oriented. So apologies for the nature of that. But as you see, we've done essentially a multi-select, and now some of these counties have been deselected because they fall outside of that filter and that filter, because it's a combination of the two. And the population then within the map, still within that, or if I zoom out, more broadly in the US, the population that meets those criteria of being, low volume, low percentage African American, high percentage white, for example, is these counties here with that population. So that analysis has had to go back to the CARTO server to rerun to provide that data up to the user, but that's very much a controlled experience for that user in terms of what they're able to do. So that's a very quick run through the sort of analysis workflow of CARTO Builder. If you're creating things on Engine, you can do even more. You just need to be able to create a web application yourself to run on top. So, for example, Global Forest Watch is an application built on Engine, running on CARTO Engine. See, we're attributed down here. And this is looking at deforestation data from around the world. And you can see up here, there's a lot of options within this interface that we as a user can add in as layers, essentially, to this map to look at. And we can certain layers to make them not visible, add them back in. And we can draw shapes to look at the data just within certain areas. There's a lot we can do with this within this interface, and all of that has been defined within the web application, but it's calling back to CARTO to provide the data in the structure that is required through the app that's been requested from the application layer. And so CARTO is the layer underneath, and this is a great example of a sophisticated Engine application, but you can make things very simply on top of Engine as well. So one that was built by one of our Australian partners, one-day hackathon, using open data from Melbourne, is just simply defines, you define point A and point B. It gives you the optimal route along that between those 2 points using classic routing Engine data services on the back, but then provides analysis based on the open data from Melbourne of traffic accidents. What the analysis on the historic data looks like for types and so forth along that route, and indeed changes the route if the transportation is more appropriate to a different route. And this was done in less than a day, so you can make very, very quick and fast applications on top of CARTO as well. So hopefully, in a whistle-stop tour kind of way, I've given you a fairly good window on the breadth of what can be done with a platform like CARTO. And then I probably will come back out of my browser at this point, I think, and back into my slides to just explain a little bit more about my background and where we are as CARTO. We think careers within GIS are perhaps heading as well as a consequence of some of these changes that we're seeing in our industry. So, where did I go? I went to the wrong slide. I put that one in twice. Okay, so first of all, my background originally was in GIS back in the 1990s. So this is certainly a long time before anything got as interesting as it is today. And that was when I originally read archaeology and anthropology at university. And I then went to teach the summer school at the university afterwards and so forth. But unfortunately, as some of you on the call may or may not know, archaeology is a very poorly paid career in the UK. And so I moved into more commercial realms and into recruitment and HR. So I have a fairly good background. I have a master's degree in human resources, so I have a fairly sort of good understanding of career paths from that perspective. And then in doing that and running the European recruitment for Red Hat, an open source software vendor, I moved across into what I do now functionally, which is alliances and partnerships within software organizations. And I've done that then for a series of open source companies over the last few years. Some of those names may be familiar to you, they may not. And now I'm at CARTO doing exactly that. So what that means is that my responsibility here at CARTO is to manage our relationships with partner organizations, and that can be anything from organizations like the Ordnance Survey, who are a provider of data and content that many of our customers want to analyze and use within CARTO. And it's also relationships with organizations like consulting firms and systems integrators who build solutions for companies using CARTO within the architecture of the solution they build. And so those relationships are then what I'm responsible for. And the reason I want to sort of throw all these logos on a map with a few wacky arrows was to demonstrate that really, the path that I have gone through to get to this position is certainly not a straight line. It's a zigzag, and I think increasingly we see that and certainly from my experience as in HR, the linear career path is now a far less common event for people. So it tends to be a lot less often that people will start with a single qualification on a particular industry, single company for 20 years, and slowly work, gradually work their way up the ladder within that organization. It does happen, and it will still continue to happen, but more often now we're in a market and particularly in technology, we're in industries where the things move very quickly, companies change very quickly, and opportunities come around very quickly for people who are able to manage their own careers and take that control. And that brings me then to where the career futures are, as I would see it, and I think sort of as CARTO would see it in GIS. So for us, as I mentioned, what we do as location intelligence overlaps with traditional GIS, but is not. We don't see it as GIS in its purest true form. It's geospatial analysis, but it's geodata science. And what we see a lot of, and the purpose of the builder interface, as you probably saw, is to democratize, I suppose, that ability to do spatial analysis. So traditionally, and as I'm sure many of you will have experienced, GIS still today in many organizations is in a traditional corporate organization that has a GIS requirement. So say a train company, for example, or a local government organization will often have a GIS team whose focus is very technically driven on delivering GIS solutions and capability to the broader business. And what we see happening, it's gradual. This is not going to happen overnight, but gradually we're seeing more and more as businesses become aware of the value of this spatial data, that this needs to be brought in and used more broadly in projects and applications and work broadly across their business. So not just as a GIS separate silo discipline, but geodata baked in and pervasive as a consideration across all sort of data analysis within a business. So, treating with the same importance that, time has been treated with as a dimension within data before now. And so we see this idea of geodata science as a skill set emerging. And right now it's certainly its own distinct discipline. It's an extension of traditional GIS. But I think where we will see this then moving towards is the ability to do accessible geo-analysis and manipulation will be something that's more expected of all data scientists and all data analysts in businesses. And then the role of the GIS, what is now a sort of a GIS specialist, will be more as a coach to bring forward the awareness and skills to do understand those concepts of the geo-analysis and manipulation for those broader teams. As we see this geodata pervade more broadly through the business. So that's the end of my slides. You'll hopefully be very relieved to know. I hope that the content and the demonstration was also useful and informative. I have more examples up my sleeve, which I can pull out if there are any questions around them, or if there are any questions more broadly about what we do as CARTO. Have we had any questions?
Actually, one on the live chat, and then we have some on Twitter as well.
Okay, far away. Let's have them.
So I'll start with the one on the live chat, and one of our viewers asked if the best systems are intuitive and they should make the complicated simple.
Sure.
So how long does it take for someone without any GIS experience to get up to speed and sort of get the most from a tool like CARTO Builder? Great
question. So one of the first thing I'll point you towards in terms of if you are wanting to get started with CARTO Builder is make a note of this URL, and we can send this around afterwards as well. As we're an open source company, everything we do is available online, and training is no exception to that. So you'll see here we've got some here that will walk you through Builder, and in fact Engine as well if you want to build custom applications on Engine. But they give you all of the sort of foundational kind of training you would need to be able to use all the facilities. What I would say though is that if I go back to my Builder interface, there are a lot of features constantly changing. Sometimes it's just little widgets and things that change within the application, but because we're hosting a cloud service for our software, we have a very agile DevOps development path behind it. So there are daily releases into the code for our cloud service. So that means that even I will do demonstrations sometimes and find little widgets and features that have changed on the fly. So hang on, let me go back. I clicked a wrong button there. Just 1 second. I hope I haven't lost my internet connection. bear with me. But there was, if you remember, there was a little widget between map and SQL down here to take us from the data. That actually changed. There we go. No, that's not me. Let me go back in. I'll log in again in a moment. But that was a change that just happened on the fly a few days ago. So there are always constant little changes happening. In terms of, to directly answer the question, how quickly can you become capable with Builder? Really, in less than a day, I would say, you will know enough to be able to to share and publish maps very easily, and to do some of the basic analyses. It depends how much you understand about spatial analysis already as to how quickly you become comfortable with some of the more complex analysis methods that are available even through the Builder interface. And hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, we also have a couple from Raresh on Twitter, and he's interested in what in particular is CARTO looking for in new employees. And for example, recent graduate with less than 2 years experience, or what additional experience or courses, masters.
And does knowing Spanish help get a job at CARTO?
Yeah.
You know what? Knowing Spanish probably does help, but in truth, I mean, I'm trying my best to learn Spanish with Duolingo on my iPad, and it's embarrassing. I'm not even going to tell you what % fluency I have because it's bad. I'm sure learning Spanish helps with a company like CARTO with our heritage, but that's not really the important measure. I would say the question, there's two sides to that question. What are CARTO looking for? So an organization like CARTO, common with other open source startups, passion is one of the most important underlying capacities that is commonly looked for within employees. Now, how that manifests itself in terms of what you tangibly do that shows you have passion. For example, if you're on the technical side, so if you're looking at more engineering type roles, product development or field engineering type positions with a company like CARTO, then being involved with some of the open source projects around what we do, or within the open source project of CARTODB itself, would be a phenomenal and surefire way to get the attention of our technical team and give you that credibility at the table. And that's one of the real benefits to us. Let me just get rid of that little pop-up there. That's one of the real benefits to us as CARTO of being an open source based company, is that we provide this wrapper of CARTODB, but within CARTODB as a stack, there are a series of other open source projects that make that stack, like Postgres, PostGIS, Leaflet. There's a whole bunch of different pieces, and if you're able to demonstrate an involvement with any one of those elements, that's a massive catalyst for being involved with our technical team directly. On a non-technical level, if you're interested in more corporate functions or sales, marketing, and those areas, then the way that passion we demonstrate will be more, an involvement in community activity, around what CARTO is doing. So, for example, last night we had our first UK community user group and some very interesting speakers at that showing us what they've done with CARTO. So that very participation type approach. If you can show a passion and demonstrate a passion for what we're doing, then that gets our attention far more directly. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. We also have another one from Ren Q on live chat. Do you see geodata science skills in a specific education channel in the future, or do you see it becoming a higher education?
That's a great question, isn't it? So right now, I think there's two ways to answer this. I mean, geodata science as its own discipline, I think would never be something that would ever be a discipline below higher education at university level in its own right, because its audience is too focused and too restricted. It wouldn't become part of a general syllabus at a lower level, I would expect. I'd love to be proved wrong. But I think the essence of what I'm saying about geodata analysis becoming more pervasive means that when you see GCSE computer science being applied more often in the UK now, and in fact, I saw a map last night from the Royal Society. I think I bookmarked it even. Wait, did I bookmark it? Tell me I bookmarked it. I haven't bookmarked it. Never mind. I saw it last night. The Royal Society did a map with CARTO. Of course they did. That showed where schools, the density of schools are you offering GCSE computer science. And I think, to answer the reason I'm bringing that up is that I think the concepts of what you can do with something like CARTO will, as geodata becomes more a standard part of any data analysis, it will be in the mix there, but not necessarily identified as its own discipline. As its own discipline, I think it will continue to be higher education. There are some very good departments for that. I think Liverpool is one of the standout departments in the UK at the moment for geodata science, but there are others as well emerging. So watch that space, I think. Any other questions?
Not that I can see at the moment, but I do have one. I was thinking, for example, in your experience and your through progress in career, what were the key skills or key, capabilities that helped you progress in your geospatial industry or just career alone as well?
Sure. So I think to sort of to go back to the point I made around the sort of the zigzag nature of how the path I've taken so far in my career. If I've always been minded to be developing myself and my skills and capabilities. So I've taken additional master's degrees and those kinds of things in my own time, where I've been able to constantly develop myself, to improve myself, because that's just been a driving force for me. But if you took in the sort of the stack of steps I've made in my career, if you look at sort of two of those positions that are not connected directly, so there's another position in between them, I wouldn't have been a fit from that first one to the one that's 2 steps further on. Each step I've made has developed me further, and then enabled me to be able to have the skills and the experience and the capabilities and the knowledge to do the next step, and then that's enabled me to do the next step. So it's been a sort of in that way, actually, a more straight line sequence of development. But functionally, from a corporate perspective, it looks a lot more zigzag, because it's sales, it's HR, it's alliances, and then the geo bits here, the geo bits here. So those individual parts are all over the place, but it's all of those parts together that allow me to do what I do now. So if I just knew geo, I wouldn't have the alliance and the partners piece that I wouldn't be able to do that part. And that's been a separate skill thread.
Just being keen and being always, as you said,
enthusiasm always helps.
Enthusiasm to learn helps. And to develop.
Yeah.
Yes.
People love enthusiasm. Okay.
Yes. I was also thinking something more specific to CARTO, for example. Where do you see CARTO moving forward in terms of the geospatial industry? Where do you think they would rather develop more, and where they would see a less interest in their development? So
I think the role of CARTO more broadly. So this is a very fast-moving space that we're in right now. So it's a very crystal ball moment to try and sort of predict in 2 years' time even where location intelligence will be, because for sure, although we're innovating very quickly around our products, so is every other organization in the BI space and the GIS space as well, similarly innovating along those lines. And quite where the boundaries between BI and location intelligence will be as we go down the road, that may change. One of the more recent, let me just see if it will come up. It's hopefully going to. Here we are. So a recent announcement that we made that's sort of an interesting is of CARTO into the Einstein analytics piece of Salesforce. So the investment arm of Salesforce Ventures are an investor in CARTO, but that's not part of why this happened. This is sort of independent of that. But you can see here some of this might look a little bit familiar in terms of some of the base maps, because powering the spatial element here in this interface is CARTO within the Salesforce Einstein analytics piece, and that's certainly right now in the immediate time horizon for us. That's really where I think the most opportunity lies for us as CARTO. Is CARTO as a platform for other people to create spatial solutions that are
Yes.
pertinent to their business. In this case, in Salesforce, it's their Einstein analytics piece, but it's that CARTO as a platform play that is really, for us, at least ourselves, this is where there's real magic for us. The interface layer, the builder piece, is still very important, and that's where strategy consulting firms in particular most heavily use CARTO, because an interface like that allows a data analyst who's not heavy in GIS in their background to be able to do a lot of those kinds of spatial functions with ad hoc analyses. But the sort of productizing CARTO into other wrappers like this is where there's a huge amount of opportunity.
Yeah, excellent. Okay.
Great. So I think that probably brings us to the end, a little bit ahead of time. So everybody gets 10 minutes back.
If anyone has any sort of last-minute questions, anything burning, please do shout. If not, we might just wrap up.
If not, thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope this was informative and useful for those of you who are still there. And well, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do this again sometime in the future.
Yes, more than likely.
I'm pleased to say I'm now on will be in January joining the AGI Council. I will be continuing to be involved and a part of this. And if anyone would like to reach out to me separately after this via LinkedIn or Twitter and ask any early careers type advice of me, I'm more than happy to share my opinions. But everybody has opinions.
No, that's great. The more the merrier, and it's good you're joining the AGI because it's mine today and for presenting to our members. And more than likely we would have another webinar coming soon. But yes, as well, members, if you do have an interest in any particular subjects, do shout, and we will be happy to ask any other mentors you would like to have as a speaker. And don't forget as well to sign up to all of our social media links. If you want to become a member as well, have a look on our website, and you have the choice of an individual membership, but also the corporate membership. Ask your company if they already have a corporate membership or if they would like to have one. If not, the individual one, I think it's around £70 per year. However, you do have a lot of discounts to a lot of events, workshops, all of this would be available to you if you become a member. But yes, I hope you enjoyed the webinar with us today, and it will be posted as well as a video on YouTube, so you can come back to it anytime you want to have a look, go through it. And again, thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully see you soon with another webinar. And thank you very much again.
My pleasure.
Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.
See you. Bye.